Copyright disclaimer. Under Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational, or personal use tips a balance in favor of fair use. Okay, guys, I found this. I believe this is a blog. And the name of the blog article is Scientology, the Apollo series. So I'm going to be reading on my tablet because this is quite small. So. Sunday, 8 July 2012. I realized very quickly I would not have sufficient time to say everything I wanted. Therefore, the lead into my speech had to be forgotten. It has been said people would probably like to hear what I missed out. So without further ado, here it is in its entirety. On the day, I kind of ad-libbed a bit as I went along. The first piece was inspired by infringing amongst exes. Don't hate the person, hate the deed. Whilst most execs and critics are on the warpath for David Miscavige, and rightly so, he is and has been in charge for some 36 years now, and came to power under dubious circumstances. The gross abuse and misconduct in Scientology started long before he was even born. Facts. I was a child in Scientology when it became popular to move to East Grinstead and follow the leader L. Ron Hubbard. LRH had a very tight rein on Scientology and also that of his followers. It is many of these earlier crusades for Hubbard who still to this day hold him in high esteem, mind control, and continue the charade of how harmful Scientology is under Miscavige. Yep, Rinder and all the other people pushing that. Which it is, but seem to conveniently forget that it was Hubbard who started this whole heavy ethics handlings, and it is, if it wasn't for Hubbard, David Miscavige would not exist. Yeah, and also his parents. I personally don't think that Ron Miscavige Sr. was a good dude. At all. Check the record on that one. The very foundations of Scientology of which it has always operated on and from are those of L. Ron Hubbard and his third wife, Mary Sue Hubbard. Over the years, there have been many defectors, some who have seen the lies for themselves and realized this was a con. But there are still others, old-timers who, although well aware of the abuse, instigated directly from the LRH, still insist on adherence to the tenets of the foundations of Scientology. Yeah, I think they call that independent bullshit Scientology. And many also still cling to silence in the hope that with the ever-increasing deaths of the old-timers, there will be no one left to tell the tales, that it eventually will all go away and no one will be left culpable. Well, it won't. Hold on, guys. Children in Scientology have always had a very hard time of it. Right from the very beginning, and none more so than LRH's own children, of which there were 7. Yeah, we don't hear about all those 7 children, do we? The rumor is, and I have not vetted this, but I've seen numerous occasions, people that were in Scientology stated that LRH admitted in Scientology auditing that he essayed his daughter Diane, allegedly. Not content with having complete control of his own children, and to some extent they had minds of their own, he sought to control the minds of his followers' children also, and none more so than in his messengers. On board the Apollo, he succeeded in some at least. He also used his skill at subordination of others to take control of all crew and their children, subjecting both adults and children to extreme mind control and mental and physical abuse. Let's not forget the SA part. This had already started long before the ships took to sea. This is why I don't trust a lot of these people that are saying the Apollo was so great. Creeping through the adults and into the children by use of the TR's training routines. Part of the doctrine of Scientology tech is that you have lived before this life. You are not your body, you are a thetan or spirit that has lived many times over and will continue to do so. And on that theme, children became adults in little bodies. It's a pedo paradise. The trouble with the working doctrine of Hubbard's Scientology tech is that in itself left it wide open for interpretation for child abuse, physically, sexually, emotionally, and mentally. Yes. That above is the main body of the part I didn't say at the conference. Yeah, I probably because so much pushback. Now for my speech, of which bits are missing in the main speech, but this is what I wrote down prior to going to Dublin. I'll check that out later. My speech starts, hold on. My speech starts at 49:16 on the live stream. Having rewatched it, I ad-libbed quite a lot, so this transcript is not exact. My family moved to East Grinstead in 1963 when I was 6 years old. We moved house 4 times in as many years, and the last 2 abodes were full of Scientology boarders from around the world to attend courses at St. Hill Manor. My father worked at St. Hill as a cashier registrar. I was 8 or 9 years old when I did the children's courses at St. Hill, which consisted of the training routines, or TRs as they were known. My father thought it would help me as I was quite shy. I wasn't keen to do them, but did so to please my father, and it did. However, I did not like doing them and found them quite scary. I should like to point out that this is quite common for a child in Scientology. In the early to mid part of 1967, Ernie Martin, a matador who reside at Copper's Wood, touched me inappropriately. Let's get that name, you guys. You got it? You ready? Write it down. In the early to mid part of 1967, Ernie Martin, a matador, whatever the hell that is, who reside at Cooper's Wood, touched me inappropriately. Like I said, a pedo paradise. Whilst teaching me martial arts. The final time being in a semi-lit room with several, listen to this, with several other fucking people present. I added the F-bomb. Whilst watching TV. The Scientology owners of the house quickly dealt with the situation by sending me off to bed, taking me out for day the next day whilst getting rid of him. But they never got rid of him far enough. He went on to become a Class 8 auditor. He went on to become a Class 8 auditor. He went on to become a Class 8 auditor. And a Kakan, an untouchable. The reason, as I see it, was to not make waves for L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. In October of 1967, I left for Tunisia with my father to join the Royal Scotsman. Honestly, too, where was her dad? To join the Royal Scotsman and became a Sea Org member, signing a billion-year contract at the age of 10. My father queried this as I was so young. Well, at least he queried it. But the decision to stay became mine as I had been so upset at the thought of being parted from him and insisted I go with him. Yeah, because that's a natural order. I did not know what this meant. I couldn't fathom 10 years let alone a billion. And in retrospect, I doubt my father could either. There they go. You see how many of these children Scientologists give their parents all kind of free rein? They don't even know any different. In the roughly 20 months I spent on the Royal Scotsman Apollo, I barely got to spend that much time with my father, anyway, apart from the occasional Libs days. I became a Commodore's messenger. Even LRH commented on the fact that I was a little young, but we could give it a try. I was a messenger until mid-1969. As a messenger, I spent many hours sitting outside his office waiting to deliver messages, dispatches, fetch people, etc. I spent many hours on the bridge at sea and also followed him around when he walked the decks. Yeah, like a little servant. Saw the Rinders and the Rathburns and the Headleys and all these people. They like that shit. During 1968, we sailed around many ports, which are now vague in my mind some 40-odd years later. However many things happen on board the ship that I am never likely to forget. I bore witness to people being locked up on the Apollo, as I refer to her. There was a man locked in a cabin on the aft upper decks. You could hear him yelling and banging on the door to be let out. This went on for several days and then stopped. I have no idea who he was. I never saw him, just heard him. Yeah, he could have been dead. I mean, like, how easy would that have been for them to just throw him overboard? You guys, you all know there's bodies. You know there's bodies. My first introduction to heavy ethics was when Ron Pooks was in a condition of treason and was standing down the railings. No one was allowed to talk to him, and we, Janice and I, no one was allowed to talk to him, and we, Janice and I, had sneaked some food up to him, a present from the cook. Nothing like some good child labor, huh? I saw a young girl of about 4 or 5 years old with just her top half out of the hole where the metal grid of the ship's chain locker was. Janice Gilman and I were ushered away. The child was filthy, puffy, and red from crying so much and covered in snot. Oh, that's horrible. This played on my mind a lot. I don't know, we should maybe come up with some new terms like child abuse a la mode. You got to give the Scientologists credit. They really, really know how to do child abuse to the best, to the hilt. One time when John McAsters had been thrown over, later that day he appeared on deck with his arm in a sling. A group of us were sitting on some benches. I think I was the only child there at the time, out of a good dozen or so people. John was visibly upset. He went on about how mad all of this was and why did we accept this. Yeah, those are good questions. No one spoke to him. It was very sad and a sharp reminder to me that something was desperately wrong. Wonder how old she was here. On board the Apollo, as it was later renamed to ingratiate the Corfian officials, with the advent of setting up an academy on the island, what should have been clear, but which wasn't at that point, at least to me, was a preparation to take over the island of Corfu. It should have been clear because that was what we were supposed to be doing, clearing the planet, turning every man, woman, and child on Earth into a Scientologist. It's not working. I had heard it often enough. I should have realized, but I was only a child. Years later, long after I had left, and after getting thrown out of many ports across the globe, LRH and Scientology finally crept into the town of Clearwater, Florida, and took over the town under false pretenses. Back on the Apollo, I witnessed Bill Deach and 2 other men locked up in the cattle stalls. Back on the Apollo, I witnessed Bill Deach and 2 other men locked up in the cattle stalls. People vanished, usually in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. A story always circulated about their bad behavior. At a mandatory attendance, LRH had a grown man push a peanut around the decks with his nose. See, wasn't LRH a great freaking man? Pussy. By the time I arrived, Janice, having come and got me, we discussed what it was all about and laughed at the absurdity of it. It's abuse. Surely even LRH could not be that cruel. Yes, he could. The horror hit me when the man stood up, covered in blood. I was sent up to the crow's nest as punishment for laughing. If I actually had thought it was real. Well, I wonder, it's all these young people on that boat. I wonder if that guy was good looking. Because you know LRH looked like a freaking, he just one ugly bastard. Because that's what narcissists do. They're so insecure that they just go around doing cruel things to people based on their own insecurities. At a party on board, possibly L. Ron Hubbard's birthday, a woman was brought up from below decks, filthy, bedraggled, and dazed. It was horrible, and I think a warning to others. I don't remember who she was. Yeah, wasn't the Apollo a great freaking place to be? These are just the abuses I remember. I know there were others. Yeah, I remember hearing about a little 4-year-old being locked in, the steam room or whatever? That was horrible. I don't even know what happened to that little baby. In early 1969, my father went away on a mission. I was told he would be gone 3 weeks. It was to be a very long time before I saw him again. Yeah, they love to separate the children from the parents, but I blame the parents. I know it's stressful and all that, but stand up and do something. Before we got thrown out of Corfu, Janice Gillen and I were put in a condition of liability for being a security threat. Paranoid much? We were watched talking to Greek boys. Ooh, yeah, you know those Greek boys probably were fine. The fact that it took forever just to establish one another's names was totally besides the point when you're at war with SMERSH, apparently. I don't know what SMERSH is. Separated and interrogated separately, we found ourselves down in the hold of the ship, semi-dark and told to chip rust and clean. We had to sleep and eat down there. We were not given blankets and slept sitting up against a girder. It was cold. Food consisted of bread and, I think, cheese. I don't remember how long we were down there, but I think it was a fair while, as when we were finally allowed to seek signatures to rejoin the group up on the deck, even though it was a dark, dank day, my eyes hurt a lot trying to adjust to the light. I wish I knew how old she was. Darn it. My father had been gone ages, and I was worried why he hadn't come back. I asked for permission to go and join him wherever he was. I had to be careful as I trusted no one, as she should. But Hannah, altering hymns, kindly smile had kept me going in the hold, so I sought her help. Yeah, I read, or I shared one of her videos. That lady seemed very kind. She really did. And she sang like a canary, which was great. I was seriously depressed after my experiences and endeavored to be a very good little girl. Great place for a child, isn't it? Around a bunch of grown men. Peter brought a newspaper into me and said I should read it. His family had been talking about it. He guarded the door, as it would not have been good to get caught reading it. Yeah, because you're not allowed to read. I skimmed through it. My father was wanted for a court case concerning Scientology. The Scientologist said he was on a ship somewhere in the Med and couldn't be contacted. Lies. He hadn't been there for months. My depression worsened. It's not a good place for a young girl. The newspaper was the news of the world. It wouldn't be long before I would be joining him, then surely everything would be all right. It had never occurred to me to rifle through LRH's mail, but from that day forth I did looking for anything about my family, particularly my father. That's when I found out an ethics chit written by the MAA, Master at Arms, to have me overboarded for not pulling my weight. Wow. Mind you guys, I'm just going to add in here, these are adults, like, policing up these children. There was no way I was being overboarded if I could help it. I couldn't swim. I was scared of heights, convinced I would drown. Wow. And with so few days left till I left the ship, thought it was worth the risk. I put the chit in my pocket, went to the toilet, tore the chit into tiny pieces and flushed it away. Could I avoid the MAA? Not easy. On the day I was due to leave, I was headed across the decks toward the gangplank when I saw him staring at me. It was all I could do to keep going. I thought he would yell out, "Stop," or something, but fortunately he didn't, and I rushed down the plank and into the waiting taxi. What a relief. Upon arrival in Denmark, I knew instantly something was wrong. The moment I arrived, I was driven off in a car, so Commander Jill van Staden could tell me my dad was in treason and no longer there. He was an SP. I was devastated. What to do now? I wanted to leave, but I had to be very careful how I went about it, as you didn't just leave these people. I don't remember how the plan formed, and I wasn't even sure I had family to go. I had written my mother several times and never heard back, because they don't send the letters, that's why. The only other option was my stepmother, who was remarried to my father. But first I had to have LRH's permission. I requested a leave of absence to get an education to make me a better Sea Org member. It was granted. My stepmother agreed also. See, there were like little tiny things back then that would make living a little bit tolerable. In the meantime, my father came back to Abelund one night after I had gone to bed. He had heard I was there and also wanted his money and his passport, which they still had. Oh, let's check that again, because, you know, FBI, nobody wants to do anything. I was there and also wanted his... He was there and wanted his money and his passport, which they still had. Now, you have to remember he had been in Denmark for months without his passport, money, or belongings. I didn't know about this until morning when I was told by Jill van Staden after he had gone. I asked why I wasn't allowed to see him and was told, "You know the rules." Yes, I did, but this was my father we were talking about. I overheard the MAA telling someone else what a night they'd had bull baiting. So I asked when he'd gone and was told 5 a.m.-ish. I said, "Where did he spend the night?" The MAA pointed to the cupboard under the stairs in the main hall. They had locked my dad in a cupboard and hadn't let me speak to him. And these were the most ethical people on the planet, or so they kept telling me. That's why, you know, you hear all these stories. Like, some of these Scientologists need to just rot in hell. I was now in despair, convinced my father would not just leave me there with all these people. I spent the next few days roaming the surrounding countryside, crying, calling for him, and in the end screaming, but all to no avail. A short while before I was due to leave Abelund, Denmark, my mother turned up with my brothers and her new boyfriend. They were going to Sweden, to the org there. She said I could go with them. I spent this weekend with them, but I was convinced I only stood a chance back in my own country, and I was still determined to find out what happened to my father. She told me, "You won't find him, you know." As far as I was concerned, she was one of them. That's how it had become. Them and me. Yeah, they love that. Good old Aleister Crowley. Divide and conquer. Just when you think it can't possibly get any worse, it usually does. And so after a very brief happy interval, my heart sunk when I saw the MAA from the ship turn up the drive in a taxi. Later that evening at a party we had, he cornered me in the hall, told me he knew what I had done, referring to the ethics chit and the trouble I could be in. He told me it had gotten crazy on the ship, he'd had enough and was going back to Sweden. He told me there would be no point in telling anyone about the things I had seen or heard, because all of it was so far-fetched and crazy, no one would believe me. Do you know what they do with people who tell crazy stories? They lock them up in mental institutions. He made himself very clear. I was scared witless. I'd like to add that whilst this was happening to me, Scientology set up CCHR, Citizens Commission of Human Rights, a front group for Scientology. Trying to remember that kid that wound up Murdering his mother and family members. She was in that Commission of Human Rights. You get to a point where you always expect the worst, and believe me, worse will come. In order to leave Scientology, even on a supposed leave of absence, you have to go through a security check, and that means on the e-meter. It's a lie detector. You couldn't lie to an e-meter. It was like a god, or so I had been led to believe. It knew your every thought. Now I was in big trouble and I was terrified. I was asked lots of questions about all sorts of things, many of which I did not understand. I can't remember what, but I told a little lie, and although he asked me about it again, he moved on, which in turn led me to believe this machine was not a god. So I lied my way through the questions and gradually felt more confident. The main question I remember was whether I had any unkind thoughts about L. Ron Hubbard, Mary Sue Hubbard, and Scientology. What a ridiculous question after what I had been through. I had so many, I didn't know where to begin, so I gave a gushing appraisal, and the security check was over. I was a nervous wreck, but I was allowed to go home. See how they induce paranoia and fear? That's how Scientology makes liars of you. When I finally left Abeland, I was in the possession of an e-meter which I had been pressured to buy. I did so because I was told I would need this later on, and I needed badly for them to think I would be coming back, which of course I never would be. The plane journey home was surreal. I couldn't believe I was finally away from these loonies. There was a family on the plane who showed real concern for me. I really just wanted to be left alone, but the mother kept asking all the wrong questions. Why was I traveling alone? See, Scientologists? Why was I traveling alone? Where were my parents? Was I visiting family? I had a hell of a job getting rid of them in London. Good people. Why wasn't there anyone to meet me? It was late in the evening. I assured them I would be fine, and eventually they said goodbye. That's what parents are supposed to be like, just so anybody that didn't know. I arrived at the coach house just about midnight. The lights were on, but no one was home. I didn't even have enough money to pay the taxi after giving him everything I had, including some Danish coins. He finally left me in the middle of nowhere on my own. Another narcissist. I added that. My suitcase, my e-meter, and me. My stepmother eventually appeared. She'd been at St. Hill, surprise, surprise. It was perfectly normal for a 12-year-old to be sitting on a suitcase in the pitch black in the middle of nowhere, all on her own. My stepmother eventually appeared. She'd been at For the first time I can remember, I was taken to see a dentist. I had to have 17 major fillings. My teeth have been a problem all of my life, because they don't take care of anybody, especially the children. Going back to school was dreadful. I was way behind for my age, the dunce of the class, compounded by that Scientology kid did nothing to boost my confidence. I became that dunce. It was easier. I had one non-Scientologist friend. We'd been friends since we were 5. She told me she had seen me on TV, on the shrinking world of L. Ron Hubbard. It was to be many, many years before I ever got to see it. I just wanted to forget it had ever happened. No one seemed to know where my father was, and that included my stepmother. I had become the local Scientology babysitter, so all the Scientologists could go do Scientology at the St. Hill. One night late after babysitting, I got home to find a man's jacket on the chair. I knocked on my stepmother's door, and to my amazement, my father opened it. He said it was late and to go to bed. We'd talk in the morning. Tomorrow never came, and well, it did, but my father didn't. He'd gone. I was told by my stepmother he's an SP, he can't stay here. I mean, just like, the Scientology just like erases your mind from any common sense. Yeah, I knew the rules only too well. Babysitting became a full-time job outside of school. If not for my sister, then for other Scientologists. I was sick of it. I resented that my stepmother spent any and all spare time at St. Hill. Hubbard this and Hubbard that. Scientology this and Scientology that. It was all I ever heard, and I hated it. All I could think of was, you do nothing. But I couldn't tell her that. I wondered what would happen if I did and decided against it, as though we would be invaded by Sea Org, and I could not cope with that. I took to walking the streets late at night on my own. Didn't occur to me I shouldn't. Didn't seem to bother my stepmother that I did it as long as I went to school and was there for babysitting. I just needed to be away from it all with my thoughts. One night, she had promised to come back earlier and hadn't. I knew she would be back soon, so I checked my sleeping sister and left the house. I knew it was wrong, but I was crumbling inside. When I got back, there was a gray rag on the countertop and a note telling me I was in condition of liability. What was wrong with these people? Yeah, it's a good question. What's wrong with these people? Very good question. Crazy. We used to go to pubs and watch bands play. Eventually, as was to be expected, it got me into trouble. What I wanted more than anything else in the world was love, to be loved, and to love somebody. Not a lot for a child to want. There was none in my life, being so young and inexperienced in the ways of the world outside of Scientology, where children are not given a normal education in anything. I stupidly mistook sex for love, and on a third occasion got caught by the police. My poor deluded stepmother said, "If you wanted sex, why didn't you come in the house?" I was 12 years old. Wow. See, that correlates with what Reese was talking about. She was more concerned with the bad publicity it would cause for L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, and even said so. I didn't understand because I wasn't really aware of what I had done wrong. If anything at all made me feel slightly better, it was the thought of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard getting into trouble, long overdue from my perspective, but nothing made me feel any better. I just kept going from one bad situation to another. I had thought of blanking myself several times, but didn't know how. That came later. I was put in an assessment center for my safety. It felt like I had been put in prison, and I remember thinking, I shouldn't be in prison. L. Ron Hubbard should. Funny how life turns out. Worse was to come. Everyone put in the center had to be assessed by a psychiatrist. I refused. I was told I couldn't refuse, so I refused to answer any questions. This was it. If I answered the questions truthfully, I would be locked up in a mental institution. I will say nothing. He knew I had been away at sea with my dad. No denying that, so I gave short stories. Short stories are like where Scientologists are allowed to completely lie to save everyone from shore or something like that. I knew nothing. I didn't know who he worked for. I didn't know what his job was. I didn't know the name of the ship. I knew nothing. He tried to get me to do puzzles. I thought he was trying to trick me, so I refused to do them. He told me the sooner I answered his questions, the sooner I wouldn't have to see him anymore. So I gave a short story based on I know nothing. It worked. He left me alone. On reflection, God only knows what he must have thought. It was requested that my stepmother visit me. She was so rude. When she came, she said she had 5 minutes because she had to be at St. Hill. I remember crying and said, "Get me out of here." She replied, "You pulled it in, deal with it," and marched out of there. Well, that's a typical narcissist behavior right there. A couple of months later, I had to go spend a weekend at home. I played and baked with my little sister. The house was full of strangers. The house was full of strangers, all Scientologists. Like I said, they all talked Hubbard and Scientology and had these stupid glazed smiles on their faces. It's mind control. Late that night, they all got up and went to bed and left me to sleep on 2 chairs pushed together. I vowed I would never go back. Jumping ahead to several different sets of circumstances for me, life in care is like that. It was requested I go visit with my stepmother and sister. They now lived in Plymouth. I didn't want to go. However, pressure from both my foster mother and social worker, I finally gave in. The first evening went quite well under the circumstances, but the following day, only I reckon it was a ploy to get me into the org by saying she had some work to pick up. Once there, she thought it was time I went on the e-meter. I went ballistic. Told her and her Scientologist friend what I thought of their stupid damned e-meter and marched back to the flat, got my belongings, and left, never to return. And just see how, crazy behavior. It was shortly after that I received freeloader's bill. I got 2 in all, telling me I had to go back or pay this ridiculous amount of money. The crazy thing is, I was in care till I was 18. I couldn't go even if I had wanted to, which I did not. I ignored these letters, but I was worried, which must have shown. The next time my social worker paid a call, he wanted to know if anyone was demanding money off of me. I told him no. He kept on about it, which meant my foster mother had seen the letters, which I thought I had carefully hidden. When he'd gone, I destroyed them. Nothing more was said about it. About 6 months later, I got a wedding invitation from my stepmother. My ever-vigilant foster mother must have seen this also because I never said anything about it. I wasn't going there, no need for her to know. She tried to encourage me to go. She had obviously spoken to my social worker because he tried to encourage me to go several times. These people are so lost. I was adamant. I was not going. There was no way on earth I was ever going anywhere near Scientology. That counselor was just an idiot, or the social worker, idiot. Scientologist or anything, even remotely connected to it for as long as I lived, ever again. Apart from which I was convinced it was a further ploy to get me back in the Sea Org. No way. So bearing all that in mind, and I have narrowed it down considerably to fit into the time allotted, that is why I hate everything about Scientology. When I see children at St. Hill, when I see children getting off flag buses in Clearwater, I know what the child is going through because I was one of them once, and it is no different today than it was then, and I know I cannot rest until all forms of Scientology no longer exist. This has got to stop. Note, you will find particularly in the last paragraph, which I added to as I spoke, and in some places throughout I ad-libbed somewhat due to time restraints. Anyways, you guys, I think that's a pretty good blog posting, and I will make sure to put the link in the description box. Let me see if I can find her name. No, her name's not here. Okay, guys, there may be more to come. Have a good night, good day, wherever you are.